Welcome everyone to this impact session on building brain-computer interfaces. My name is Alina. It's a pleasure to facilitate this session. I'm heading a pitch competition for deep tech startups at Falling Walls. Falling Walls is a global hub for leaders from science, business, and politics promoting scientific breakthroughs. And one of my absolute favorite things about my job is learning about and coming across incredible pioneering ideas and companies. And this is also one of the reasons why I'm grateful to be part of this event hosted by Frontiers. I'm excited to introduce to you our speakers for this session, Olivier, Oullier, and Michael Mager. Olivier Oullier is a neuroscientist, entrepreneur, and artist. He is currently a visiting professor in the Human-Computer Interaction Department at the Mohamed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence in Abu Dhabi. He's the founder and CEO of Inclusive Brains, a company developing multimodal neuroadaptive AI systems that enable machines to sense and adapt in real time to users' cognitive and affective states. Michael Mager is a business builder with experience leading technology and technology-enabled companies, and he co-founded Precision Neuroscience and serves as its CEO. Previously, he co-founded Assembly Software, where he is co-chairman. In this session showcases emerging breakthroughs where biology and technology converge and asks what guardrails are needed as we move toward more intimate human-machine interaction.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the company that I co-founded and am CEO of, which is Precision Neuroscience. First question is, what is an invasive or implantable brain-computer interface? Basically, a BCI creates a connection between the human brain and artificial intelligence. And the initial application that we're pursuing for that is to enable thought-based control of computers and phones and other digital devices. And I'll talk a little bit about why we think that's going to be life-changing for a group of people. The way it works is basically, the brain is electrical. Any thought you ever have, whether it's recalling a memory or having an intention to move or having a new idea, there is an actual physical representation of that thought, and it is electrical. And so what a brain-computer interface does is it senses that electrical activity and it converts it into an intention to drive a computer system. This is going to be life-changing for a group of people initially who are paralyzed. So if you can't use your arms or your hands, you can't use a computer or a smartphone or a tablet in the way that we all take for granted. And in 2026, if you can't access technology seamlessly, it's an incredible impediment. Just to give this a little bit more life, I'm going to talk about Emma and Jules, who are shown on this screen. They're two members of our patient advisory board. Jules is 38 years old. He was diagnosed with ALS 4 years ago. He has an 8-year-old son. ALS is an incredibly cruel disease. It is 90% non-hereditary, so it could happen to anybody. The brain remains intact, but the brain's ability to control the rest of the body deteriorates quite quickly, and eventually lose the ability to move, to speak, and then eventually, within 5 years on average, it's fatal. When I asked Jules why he would want an implant for a brain-computer interface, he said basically two things. He said, first of all, the way that he's able to communicate now, he has a tracheotomy, he's unable to verbalize speech, so he communicates with an eye gaze technology. It's a camera that tracks his eye movements, and he's able to type letters, very painstakingly. This means communication at 5 to 10 words per minute. We speak at 150 words per minute, so unbelievably frustrating. And what ends up happening is he curtails his thoughts. He just doesn't write out all of the words that he wants to communicate because it takes too long. So he'd like to be able to communicate at a more natural pace. And second of all, he wants to communicate and have fun with his son. He wants to be able to play video games with him and bond with him in the time that he has left. So control of computing platforms with our thoughts, it may sound esoteric, even trivial, but I think it has the potential to be really life-changing for a group of people. This may sound a little bit science fiction, but it's not. The first implanted brain-computer interface dates back to 2004, so 22 years at this point. And over that period, since then, about 75 people have been implanted with BCIs, and they've been able to play video games, send emails and text messages, create digital art, all using only their thought. The issue is that BCI has existed up until now in academic settings with really like prototype devices. So devices that were developed in academia that lack the robustness to go through the FDA regulatory process and to be manufactured at scale. And so what we're doing is productizing technology that has been proven out really for 2 decades in academia so that it can reach the millions of people who stand to benefit. There are areas of technology that have been required in order to turn this into an industry. So, low power, high performance electronics, great example. Advances in material science, and finally, of course, machine learning based software to decode that we get over 1 billion data points per patient per minute. And so you need to make sense of all of that information. I think one of the key constraints to really converting this industry from something that exists in academia and in labs into something that is available in the clinic is the nature of the brain electrode interface. Most of the 75 people who have been implanted in academia have been implanted with that or with something similar to that. It's called the Utah array. It is what it looks like. It's a bed of needles, and the needles puncture into the brain and they damage the brain upon implantation. They're able to deliver function, but with obvious, somewhat intuitive downsides. And the issue with this is not just that it damages the brain upon implantation, but if you think about how this industry is going to scale over time to higher and higher channel counts, to more areas of the brain, there are only so many holes you can poke in the brain before it becomes intolerable. And yet this is the sort of paradigm that Neuralink is pursuing and that some of our other competitors are pursuing, which we don't think is the right one. So instead, we're pioneering a system that combines high resolution and high performance on the one hand with a non-damaging interface on the other hand. We do this through a very, very, very thin material that is implanted and sits conformally on the surface of the brain without penetrating into the brain. So it's 1,024 electrodes within 1.5 square centimeters. It's a postage stamp size. And the electrodes themselves, which are made of platinum, are 50 microns in diameter, which is the size of a neuron. So we're communicating with the brain at its own natural scale. This has never been done before. We manufacture this using photolithography, so the same technique as semiconductor chips. No one's ever applied semiconductor chip technology to a biomedical application. It's exciting. It's also new. There's no supply chain that exists. We had to basically build our own. We have a fab in Texas where we make this. It is now FDA cleared as of March of last year. So we're able to implant for up to 30 days. And we think this is a real breakthrough in the way that we can interface with the brain safely, but also scalably. Just to understand kind of how the full chronic implanted system works, the array is bonded to electronics, which sit in beneath the scalp, but outside of the skull. So all invisible, and there's a lead, basically a USB-C wire, that goes from the package that's underneath the skin but outside the skull down to a chest wall unit where there's a battery and wireless telemetry. This is actually the same basic architecture as a pacemaker, except the leads go to the head instead of the heart. It's also very similar to a deep brain stimulator for anyone who's familiar with that. Hundreds of thousands of people globally have been implanted. It's a very sort of well-established and safe architecture. It's all going to be invisible to the body. We're now testing this in animals, and we're going to do our first chronic implantation, so implantation intended to be permanent next year. But in the meantime, we have implanted, at this point, actually 70 people temporarily, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. I think the point that I want to make here is that we're moving very quickly, and that's partly enabled by the fact that our system is reversible and non-damaging. That just has enabled us to get into the clinic much faster than others. But this is actually happening across the industry. This is an industry that, people have been talking about BCI for a long time. It's understandable people, who are not living it day to day, maybe a little bit jaded. This is actually happening now. These systems are rapidly scaling from a low level, but you're going to see this make a big clinical impact in coming years. We're now working with 15 of the leading hospitals in the United States, Johns Hopkins, Penn Medicine, Mount Sinai in New York, and that work is continuing. Again, I want to show you, so I mentioned that we are implanting right now temporarily, so people are coming in for a neurosurgical procedure that they're undergoing in any case, and about 50% of people, when given the choice, opt to have our system implanted while they have to be in the hospital anyway, while their skull is open anyway, because they're in the hospital, they're being monitored, and they might as well operate a computer with their thoughts. It's more fun than just sitting there. And so this is an example, and I just want to make the point, this is shot on an iPhone, this is preliminary results, but this is real and this is happening. If I can play the video, it's happening. Okay, so basically the way it works is we use a joystick to train the model, and then we unplug the joystick. And so he's now controlling a computer cursor. He's physically moving his hand a little bit. We're reading the neural activity from his brain. The joystick is not connected to any electronics. We also have moved away from the joystick entirely. He is now moving the computer cursor without a joystick, simply using his imagination. And it's this paradigm that is going to make a real impact in people's lives in coming years. I think thinking a little bit more deeply and more broadly, the way that we interface with technology has evolved continuously in several paradigm shifts over the course of the past several decades. So, in the 50s, we had mainframe computers that were controlled using punch cards. With the advent of the personal computer and the laptop, we transitioned to keyboards and mice to control computers. Now, increasingly, we control technology with a little black box at the end of our hands that we tap furiously on, or with wearables like AirPods and things like that. Sam Altman and Johnny Ive are working on a new paradigm to control an AI-based computing model. We don't know what that is exactly, but I think the end state here, the most seamless, most intuitive way of interacting with technology is going to be direct neural control. And just as it was hard to predict what the keyboard and the mouse would unlock in terms of efficiency, in terms of productivity, in terms of creativity, I think it's also very hard to predict what this could mean. But I think the future is headed in this direction. I also think any system that involves penetrating electrodes is a non-starter. Asking otherwise healthy people to undergo an elective surgery that damages their brain, I think that's just very unlikely to prove successful. So all the work that I've shown you so far involves one specific region of the brain, which is the motor cortex. So in people who are paralyzed, they have intentions to move. The signals don't get to where they intend to go, but the brain operates in the same way as it does for all of us. However, over time, these systems, in order to achieve greater function, are going to interface with additional areas of the brain. I sometimes get asked why we haven't had more rapid progress in neurology. We've made tremendous advances in other areas of life science. Neurology has been very difficult. And I think one of the reasons for that is that we've figured out how to digitize biology in many other areas. So the genomics revolution is a great example where digitizing biology has enabled us to apply cutting-edge compute to unlock new areas of therapy. The brain has been very impervious to digitization. It's in the skull, so it's hard to get to. And once you get there, it's mushy, it's very delicate. And so it really has resisted up until now the ability to create sort of a digitized model. I think that the tools that we're developing have the potential to really allow us to apply cutting-edge compute and to solve some of the illnesses that plague a large portion of the population in neurology in coming years. But to do that, we're going to need to scale these systems. And so this is sort of a rendering of the direction of travel for precision. Our system from the very beginning was architected to expand, to scale. And when we talk about scaling, we mean scaling across bandwidth, which is electrode count, so scaling to from 1,024 electrodes to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually millions, and also to additional areas of the brain. And it's the same architecture here that we're employing today that will lead us to eventually a whole brain interface interacting with as much of the cortex as possible. I think this is really exciting, I think, for medicine. Jensen Huang's talked about foundational models, including foundational models for the brain. This will enable us to unlock some of the sort of secrets of the brain scientifically, and also to discover new medicines using cutting-edge algorithms. I think along the same vein, we've had over the course of the past 50 years a few breakthroughs that have created entirely new data sets in biology. We had imaging with MRIs 50 years ago. We had gene sequencing in the past 20 years. These have created whole new areas of diagnostics and therapy. And I think if you think about neurology right now, so much of neurological illness gets diagnosed through subjective descriptions. You go into your physician, you say, I have a headache, or I feel sad, or I feel depressed, or I'm anxious. It is incredibly difficult for physicians to interpret that, to quantify it, to measure in an objective way over time. And medicine is generally administered on a basically trial and error basis. I think that we're at an inflection point in neuroscience. I think we have the potential to create objective biomarkers associated with therapy, and create longitudinal data sets that we'll look back, I hope, at the current paradigm and think, gosh, how coarse was that? The WHO estimates that approximately 1 billion people suffer from neurological conditions of one sort or another. I think the tools that we're developing have the potential to alleviate, over time, a tremendous amount of human suffering, and also to help us understand this organ that ultimately makes us us. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Olivier. I'm a brain scientist, and I have one obsession in life. I want machines to adapt to human beings. We spend our lives buying machines, using machines, and having to adapt to them. Whether we're talking about a car, whether we're talking about a phone, a new workstation, we have to make the effort. It should be the other way around. This is the inspiration of my life. Don't laugh. This object was developed and invented for people with disabilities to be able to switch the channel of their TVs. Yet, what was initially an assistive technology for people with disabilities has changed the way each and every one of us have been interacting with technology over the past decades. Why? Because from something that was invented for people with disabilities, we adopted this object, and we started to remote control the world. For people as old as me, your radio, AC, and now there is the modern incarnation of this, which is your app that remote controls connected objects. What is fascinating about this object is that it shows that whomever is investing in assistive technology is not investing in something that is a niche only for people with disabilities where you're going to lose money. You can actually make a lot of money starting with technology that is developed for people with disabilities, especially if you consider that the way we've been interacting with technology has been evolving over the past decades, from touching, moving, speaking, picking up biological signals, tracking movements of the eyes, and now being able to record brain activity and make sense of brain activity thanks to this monolith for a lot of people called AI. But if we look at the way AI has emerged, it's thanks to us neuroscientists that you guys have AI today, because the first point was to try to mimic how the brain works. Now think about the circularity of it. We neuroscientists need AI in order to understand how the brain works even better. So we inspired artificial intelligence, and thanks to artificial intelligence, we are trying to understand better and better how the brain works and how the brain is allowing us to interact with the world, physical, etc. Because there is one thing that you might not have thought about, is that the brain is useless. If you take the damn thing, you put it on the table, nothing's going to happen. Not going to fall in love, not going to make a decision. The brain is becoming useful the moment it starts interacting with something else. Different parts of the brain. The body that encapsulates the brain. The body and the environments, physical, digital. Then add on top of that, interactions with others. A layer of complexity is added by my personal history, collective history. And then on top of that, there is what I imagine. And sometimes also the fact that I memorize things. We see a lot and we hear a lot that memory is a system to remember the past, but it's also the best system to design the future. So all these layers together are so complex. How can we understand them? Well, some people have made us believe that it's all about language and those large language models that have totally transformed our lives over the past almost, 3 years and a half. But look at me. I got massive facial expressions when I speak, I move, I got all of the things that happen. There are words, but there is also everything else that is happening that is kind of, I hope, enhancing what I say. Well, this is why, if you really want to talk about artificial intelligence, if you really want to interact with machines in a way that makes sense, if you really want to build machines who adapt to us, they need to understand us. And at the very least, you need to try training those AI systems with what is called multimodal approach, meaning that you got some AI systems that are trained with text. We, at the Mohamed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence and Inclusive Brains, the company I co-founded, train our models with brainwaves, facial expression, eye tracking, voice intonation. There are so many things you can hear in voice intonation. More than 25 years ago, I got a paper about how we can hear smiles in just the sound. Now add movement and touch. And then you got a little bit closer to the kind of information the brain is processing on a daily basis. But not only processing, coordinating. The core is coordination dynamics. And this is what I've been working on for more than 25 years now. It's being able to integrate all this information. Before, I was collecting the information with many sensors and trying to make sense of it by coding. But now there are artificial intelligence systems that we're building that allow us to better make sense of the data in real time. But let me go back a decade ago, when I started to try to think about how we could use non-invasive technology, meaning that where there is no implant, there is no surgery, in order to record brain activity and to transform it in meaningful information that will allow us to control or to have one action. This footage dates back to 2014, where you can see a young version of myself with no gray hair and actually all his hair, following my Harvard Kennedy School classmate, Mark Pollock. You might think, poor Mark, and you're right. He's got strong disabilities. He's Irish, he's bald. In his young life, he became blind. And because he was blind, one night, he forgot where he was when he woke up in the middle of the night. A window was open. He fell off a window and broke his spine and got paralyzed from the waist down. This is Mark. So in the basement of UCLA that very day, Mark passed the 250,000 mark using an exoskeleton that allowed him to walk. What I was doing, recording his brain activity with EEG, so recording electric activity of his brain, is to see whether someone like Mark, who's benefiting from an exoskeleton, whether his brain would function differently than someone with the same sensory motor condition that would not benefit from the simulation. And this is where the idea of mind controlling an exoskeleton started to burgeon in my brain. Little did I know that it would take more than a decade to do some things like that. Fast forward to another friend of mine called Rodrigo Mendes. Rodrigo is Brazilian, no one's perfect, but Rodrigo, when he was about to start his car to drive his younger brother to a tennis game, got shot in the back and got paralyzed from the neck down. But Rodrigo, in 2017, became the very first person to mind control a real Formula One car on a real racetrack. No command, no movement, nothing. Rodrigo used a brain-computer interface at its core, a portable technology off the shelf from the company I was the president of called Emotive, and we sold more than 100,000 of these headsets in more than 120 countries, and mind controlled the Formula One. A year later, him and I, as we were telling this incredible story in Dubai, managed to challenge Lewis Hamilton to a mind control race car and race. Problem being that Rodrigo is very easy and cheap to insure because 9/10 of his body is already not working. Insuring Lewis Hamilton is a bit more expensive, so we have to wait until he retires. Yet, it's gonna happen. Based on this story, and don't worry, I've told this story in front of him, with him next to me, etc. Plus it's recorded, so. My close friend Rodrigo, in 2016, was an Olympic torchbearer at the Rio Olympics. Yet, it was an extraordinary day for him. He was celebrated. That was 1 year before the Formula One fit. But he was sitting in a wheelchair that someone was pushing. His hand was kind of wrapped. Think about a gigantic cup holder where the Olympic torch was put by someone and taken there. And as the Paris Olympics were around the corner, my co-founder and I talked to Rodrigo, and Rodrigo said, can't we use the technology that we use for the Formula One fit in order to help someone be an Olympic torchbearer? And this is what we worked on, the idea of mind controlling an exoskeleton in order to empower someone who couldn't do voluntary movements to be an Olympic torchbearer. So there is one thing in France that you can't do, is send legally a request for someone whose brain is functioning. You know, there is no such thing as a normal brain, but someone who can focus, etc., but whose body is damaged. You can't say that. So you need to call. And we called and we called. And then we met Natalie, our volunteer. But Natalie was not just sensory motor, had sensory motor impairment. She had also cognitive impairment. She could not focus enough in order to do what Rodrigo was doing, which required attention. So we had to do what became the core of our activities. We had to adapt the technology to the person. What Natalie couldn't do was something called clenching that we can detect very well. But she can do two things. She can blow a kiss and she can smile by opening her mouth. So we adapted the technology using computer vision, using some of what we can collect from the brain information in order for Natalie to be able to mind control, again, which means controlling without movement, without touching, and without voice, an exoskeleton arm, and this is Natalie. And as you can see, it's not just about triggering it, because it's progressive. And that was a project that we could realize in partnership with Allianz Trade, who supported the R&D of this technology. It required a bit of training, but a lot less than when we trained for the Formula One car, because many years had passed, and that led to a moment where she did it in public, in my very town of Marseille, France, on May 9th, 2024, where she was the first person to be a torchbearer thanks to a brain-computer interface. And that happened in front of millions of people. We see a lot of demonstrations of technology that are videos that are captured in laboratories, and they're great. And you don't know how many takes there are. This is a one-off in front of a lot of people. Later, 2 months later, Pierre was a second volunteer, and Pierre could focus. And we had improved a little bit the technology so that there was reinforcement learning in the loop. And little did we know that not only Pierre trained to lift his arm and reach to the Olympic torch, but he also used it to act as the rock star he was in Versailles, waving to people, because the machine would learn from the interaction with Pierre. Later on, my co-founder and I were invited at the United Nations AI for Good Summit to give a demonstration of this system called Prometheus, BCI, because you bring the flame. And we did another fit. We used the same system in order to write a tweet, to upload a picture on Natalie, and to send it to someone. And you know, if you got to brag, let's brag big. So we sent it to President Macron, who kindly replied. A little story is that President Macron said it was a world first, which was true in terms of non-invasive brain-computer interface, but Neuralink and Elon Musk did it 3 months before, and they said fake news. Well, no fake news. What they did with invasive and the mind-written tweet was amazing, but it required surgery and an implant. We did it without. There is no one that is better than the other. These are 2 different fits. Not to mention our budget was tiny. Well, because we can scale. Because the goal, as it was mentioned, is not only to do these extraordinary things, who are less and less extraordinary, and to bring them to market so that as many people as possible can benefit from them. And then later on, at President Macron's AI Action Summit a year ago, we wrote and finalized a parliamentary amendment and submitted it from the French Parliament, once again, with a lot of people witnessing. The one thing, if you remember, when I started, I told you about this thing that was developed for people with disabilities, and then we learned from it and it transformed the way we function. Well, one thing we had to crack in order to minimize the time you need to parameter, to calibrate, to train the systems, was to be able to develop the best detection we could of stress, attention, cognitive load, and fatigue. And think about it. These, we developed them in order to achieve and to make our assistive technology as powerful, as efficient, as stable, and reliable as possible. But that's just like the remote control. It has a lot of applications. Let me show you 2. If there is one place where everyone is stressed, almost, is when you go to the dentist. So you see the patient is wearing brain-sensing earbuds that with my previous company, Motive, we commercialized in 2019. For the record, Apple and Meta released their patent in 2023. With all these combinations, the system can adapt to what makes the brain unique and make sure that we learn, we improve, etc. And because we can't do things on our own, I was supported by my fellow young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. We created an initiative, and the person here, my friend Brooke, passed, unfortunately. But all these extraordinary individuals have been contributing to the work that hopefully will have the same fate and destiny as the remote control. Thank you very much for your attention.